Welcome to What Crime Is It? I am your host, Cassidy, and this is part 2 of the Sherri Papini abduction case from 2016. The 34-year-old married mother of 2 vanished while on an afternoon run in Redding, California. If you've not watched part 1, please go back and watch. We do a little background on her life, her family, her relationships, her marriage to Keith. We take you all the way up to the day that she was found missing. We are discussing the crime today, the many twists and turns, and where the case stands. There's a lot to unpack with this one, so let's get started. So we ended where Keith came home from work on November 2nd. He found that Sherri and the children were missing from the house. Again, we laid out the details of the discovery in episode 1. According to Keith, when he discovered that Sherri was in fact missing, he first called his mother and then the children's daycare listed as Shasta College Early Childhood to ask what time Sherri had picked up the children. He was then informed that the children were still there. Now, I had some questions about this detail, and it seems after some more digging, I'm not the only one. My question was, why wouldn't the daycare have alerted Keith or tried another emergency contact when the children were never picked up? Last week when we spoke, we said, well, maybe Sherri was inconsistent with pickup times. But after some more digging, I actually found out some information that I thought was interesting. This is an online review of the Shasta College Early Childhood. This was submitted by a parent, August 28, 2013. This is the best preschool in Redding. Here's a few reasons why. This is not a daycare, no naps, no diapers. Classes are 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. The classrooms are like fish bowls with double-sided mirrors and microphones. Parents can come and view and listen. Another interesting fact from the website, parents have the options to enroll their children in what they call a Head Start or an early Head Start program, which allows parents to drop their children off at 7:30 a.m. and pick them up at 2:30 p.m. So in other words, the latest pickup time is 2:30 p.m. So Keith got home over 3 hours after that time. And you mean to tell me that he had not been called by the daycare? That no one had been called? Not a next of kin? You would think someone like that would be on file, like a grandparent or a sibling. You know, typically, I mean, any doctor or school, I mean, even as an adult, you have to give a next of kin. So I'm confused as to this detail. And there hasn't been anything that I could find that explained whether or not the daycare called him, how he could have not known that the children hadn't been picked up, unless he did know and he left that detail out. If you have any more information about that, please post in the comments. I'm super curious. I'd just like to add that there were also questions about why she would even send her kids to daycare, because she didn't work apart from some online selling and a little like side hustle that she had. I guess she had sort of an eBay store. I don't think it was on eBay, but she was selling like used things online. You know, I send my dogs to daycare. I have 2 Yorkies and one is a puppy, and I need my quiet time. I don't know why anybody would have to apologize for needing a little bit of quiet time to paint your toenails or go for a run or do some grocery shopping or take a nap or eat a naughty snack, maybe out of the prying eyes of your children. I don't think it was such a big deal that she needed a daycare a few days a week. You know, for me, not a big detail. Anyway, moving on. So Keith makes arrangements for his mom to pick up the kids and he calls 911. So here is some audio from that call.
911, what is your emergency? CHP transfer. Keith is on the line. Hello, can I help you?
Yeah, I just got home from work, and my wife wasn't there, which is unusual, and my kids should have been there by now from, like, daycare. So I was like, oh, maybe she went on a walk. I couldn't find her, so I called the daycare to see what time she picked up the kids. The kids were never picked up, so I got freaked out, so I hit, like, the Find My iPhone app thing, and it said that it showed her phone, like, at our end of our driveway. We don't have really good service.
Okay.
Not the end of our driveway, but the end of our street. But just drove down there, and I saw her phone with her headphones because she started running again. And I found her phone, and it's got, like, hair ripped out of it, like, in the headphones. So I'm, like, totally freaking out, thinking, like, somebody, grabbed her.
Okay, what's your address?
Redding.
Okay, what's your last name?
Yes. Papini, Papini.
And your first name?
Keith.
Keith?
Yes.
Okay. Did you go pick up your children?
No, I'm going to call my mom and have her do it.
Okay. What's your wife's name?
I'm going to knock on every door. Sherri, Sherri.
And same last name?
Yes.
So obviously there's a little bit of a timeline thing there that's confusing. And any sort of timeline that I have relayed was straight from Keith's mouth, from interviews that he's done. So he's saying that he's going to call his mom to have them picked up at the daycare. According to him, he had already called his mom. I don't know, but he has now made the call, and the Shasta County Sheriff, Tom Bosenko, caught the case. I've always wanted to say that. Caught the case. And he did confirm that the phone had been found neatly placed on the ground, telling the Today Show it appeared to be set in some grass with the screen facing up. And then the earbuds to the phone were loosely coiled and appeared to be placed on the screen. He added, it did somewhat appear to be that it was placed there purposely. Police immediately searched neighbors' properties and spoke to anyone who may have been at home that day, may have seen something or was familiar at all with the usual routine of Sherri. 77-year-old neighbor Joyce Allison is quoted as saying, she keeps to herself and stays at home with the kids. I've been here 12 years and I've never seen her jogging. The only time I've ever spoken to him, meaning Keith, was when she went missing. Another neighbor who was interviewed was certain that if an abduction had taken place in that area of Sunrise Drive, someone would have seen or heard something, and yet Sherri was seen jogging in that exact area by a driver passing by. As the investigation progressed, police obtained cell tower and phone records, as well as chased down over 400 leads that came up via tip line. Concerned citizens, having heard rumors for years about sex trafficking in the area, began calling concerned. The Interstate 5 corridor, according to local law enforcement, is a high sex trafficking corridor. Women and also children reportedly go missing from the area with some frequency. Kay Buck, chief executive of the Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking in Los Angeles, said in part, the I-5 corridor was one of significant criminal activity. One such concerned caller was a woman named Isabella Corey, who reportedly told police that because she looks similar to Papini, she was afraid that traffickers might want to take her as well. There was any initial suspicion of Keith's involvement with Sherri's disappearance, his total cooperation with police, including an hours-long polygraph exam, ultimately cleared him with investigators. It took 9 days for him to no longer be considered a person of interest, and still, police were not calling it an abduction yet. Regardless, Keith was certain that Sherri was taken against her will. Interestingly, receipts obtained by DailyMail.com reveal that police also traveled to Detroit, Michigan, during the first 2 weeks of the investigation, arriving in the city on November 9th. Detective Kyle Wallace, who was leading the investigation, visited a number of suburbs, including Plymouth, Canton, Northville, and New Hudson, before returning to Reading on November 11th. Records show he was joined for the trip by another officer, Sergeant Brian Jackson, who you will hear from later in the podcast. Speaking about the trip at the time, Jackson said, detectives went to Michigan to conduct follow-up about Miss Papini's disappearance, but we are not able to comment about specifics due to the investigation being open and ongoing. One of the angles detectives pursued was Papini's alleged relationship with a male acquaintance from Michigan. Using phone records, detectives discovered that Sherri had planned to meet the man when he came to California for business, just days before she disappeared. But investigators later determined that he had no involvement in her disappearance. While speculation swirled around town, and on the Reddit message boards, they started to ask, had Sherri been meeting men online, maybe for money? There was also some questions about a newly obtained breast augmentation. You know, the questions mainly about that were, you know, how does a family who's, you know, existing on a Best Buy manager's salary and a woman who stays home, how do they afford, you know, something like that? Cosmetic surgery isn't covered by health insurance unless it's due to disfigurement, and even then, only in rare cases. When a well-known internet adult entertainer posted on a message board that her quote unquote friend had gone missing, it only added to the rumor mill. Of course, during this time, Keith was focused on finding Sherri, on caring for their 2 small children, and holding firmly to the belief that Sherri would never leave her family willingly. In the days and weeks that Sherri was missing, Keith was plagued by imagined scenarios. Is she hot? Is she cold? Is she hungry? He imagined her screaming his name, begging for him to come save her. And all he could do was cry at his inability to protect and to comfort his wife and mom, to Tyler and Violet. Keith began doing television interviews, including and most famously, I think, the ABC primetime interview with Matt Gutman. Much of the quotes actually from this podcast are from Keith, and they're taken from that interview. The timeline that he lays out is verbatim from the horse's mouth. The town came out for organized searches. They hung yellow ribbons and giant posters everywhere they could. On the Matt Gutman interview, there is a clip from one of these vigils or searches of Sherri's sister and Keith's sister. Keith's sister has a hard-to-explain air of cynicism about her. When she says, "We just want Sherri to come home," or something to that effect, she does something that body language experts call an eye block. It's a form of deceptiveness. So when you're saying something in the moment and you close your eyes and hold them shut, or you do multiple blinking.
Please bring her home. She has babies. She loves them. She's a family that loves her. Please just bring her home.
Just bring Sherri home, please.
An anonymous donor appeared and also offered reportedly $100,000, but at the very least, a large sum of money to get her back. And we're going to discuss that with Annie, who's going to be joining us in a couple of minutes. And now they need $50,000 more. And I'm sort of racking my brain at this moment for what? So even if you wanted to say that posters and ribbons aren't free and you want to provide water and sandwiches for the generous volunteers who are coming out to search, one might argue that this does, cost money, but it doesn't cost 50 grand. You can also maybe believe that you could find people in a small community who will donate water and sandwiches, and that posters on the absolute top of the scale might cost you $100. I make posters, please, trust me here. Not to mention that a local printer would have likely been willing to donate or discount the cost as well. Under these circumstances, I feel like you probably could have gotten some support there. I just have a hard time figuring out the immediate cash grab. We need money, lots and lots of money. And, what if she needed a private detective might be what somebody says. I can understand that, but it wasn't a year down the road. The police had not yet shown them that they needed a private detective, right? The police were on it. They were searching. They were questioning people. They were flying to Detroit. They were on the case. If a year down the road you need a detective because you feel like the police aren't doing their job, I can understand that. But it just seemed a little early to need that much money for a detective, not to mention the fact I came to find out that a man named Bill Garcia was a private investigator, and he worked pro bono for the family during her disappearance. Sorry, fixing my shirt. But Sherri went missing for 3 days, and the solicitation for funds began, and I think it's a little strange. Is the family saying that I'm not spending a penny of my own money trying to find someone who has done this before? That was the speculation. There's an unfounded allegation that Miss Papini's in-laws made claims that she attempted to stage her own abduction in 2006. And the police reports that were filed by her parents when she was a teenager that we mentioned in the first episode, that she engaged in self-harm and attempted to blame the injuries on her parents. Within the first 10 days of Sherri's disappearance, a full media campaign had begun. A pretty Caucasian young mother vanishes while out jogging, and her fresh-faced husband's tearful plea to the public for their help, for her safe return. It was the perfect narrative, I think, for this image-driven media competing for eyeballs and imaginations. Glossy, professionally shot photos of the couple were splashed across television and national magazines, on web pages. It's like they knew somehow that they would need these high-res photos, that they'd come in handy someday. So on November 5th, Sherri's friend Lisa Jeter is contacted about an anonymous donor that I mentioned earlier. And we'll tell you a little bit more about that, who offers a large sum of money for Sherri's rescue effort. So it's at this time that two new players emerge, one whose name we know and one whose name we don't. Anne Marie Donahue is back, and she is going to pick up the story here Hi, Annie.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Good. You have done a little background on a man named Cameron Gamble, a self-described international kidnap and ransom consultant, which is like super deep.
I know. Yeah,
Have you had some fun checking this guy out?
I have. Oh,
Tell me about him. Tell me.
So Cameron, the character named Cameron. So Cameron David Gamble, that's his name. He's married to Jennifer Gamble. They have 5 kids, by the way.
Wow.
So yeah, they have 5 kids, and it looks like I would say they're probably 10 to 2, but lots of kids. Yep.
Wow.
So yes, so we hear about Cameron. We hear he's actually knows Lisa Jeter. So that's how they're introduced. Yes, this is like very important. So Lisa Jeter.
That is important, though, not to interrupt you, because everything that I've read, right? I don't know if you're right, have read this, but everything that I've read, they were introduced through a third party. That's what I thought I read, but no, that's not the case, huh?
I mean, not what I've read. So first of all, there's a common denominator. Lisa Jeter's friends with Sherri. And right. So Cameron would go around and make speeches at Rotary clubs. And so she met him when he was making speeches on kidnapping, his business, Project Taken. So she met him from there, and she said, let me introduce you to the family because we're in this situation. It just looks interesting to me because there's a common denominator. So this friend, Lisa, is the one who brings him in to the scenario. Yeah. I read that in a few areas, and we'll include the list, but for sure Daily Beast, and some other areas for sure. Yeah.
So at this point, was the anonymous donor? Because I know the anonymous donor was introduced to Lisa as well. Isn't that right? I mean, so what was first? What was the chicken or the egg on that? Was it the anonymous donor came through Cameron, or?
Yeah, I think it was through. What I read too is that Keith is the one that had this idea of offering ransom. According to Cameron in an interview, might have been with Chris Hansen, Chris Hansen, the crime news. Cameron was like, well, Keith was the one that came up with this idea to offer ransom, even though they're not asking for it, to get her home. It just seems, if you talk to law enforcement, they're going to tell you they don't really, you be involved with law enforcement, and usually it's asked within 48 hours, right? And no one in this story has a lot of money. So then Keith supposedly had this idea, like, well, why don't we offer a ransom, like you were saying, to get her back? Like, this is going to entice somebody to bring her back. So I think it was Cameron that introduced the no name, Monsieur No Name. Yeah,
Mr. In the Shadow interview. Yeah. But the thing that's interesting too about that is, again, there's so much conflicting information, because I also read that Keith didn't want the money from the anonymous donor, that he turned it down at first. And I wonder sometimes, was that a ploy so that he didn't look like he was so quick to grab the money?
Maybe. And then, they started that site for Sherri where they were the GoFundMe.
So what did this guy Cameron do? What did they empower him to do at that point?
So at this point, he's going off on his, he's speaking about his background as a negotiator. He has this company called Project Taken. Now, if you go on Vimeo, so there's 2 incredible videos that I found. The one that it's called Project Taken Short. It's on Vimeo. Why he would label it, I mean, I'm just being discerning here, but like a short is like what a person who's studying acting posts on Vimeo. Here's my short. So it's literally called Project Taken Short. Clearly actors. Girl gets kidnapped. She bumps into a guy. She ignores him. He kidnaps her, pay attention to me. It seems very theatrical, but this is what he's boasting that he does. And so then she's kidnapped in a basement, and then Cameron shows up like, I can help you get out of the situation. I mean, it's completely not well made. It's really strange. So this is like Project Taken. So he has this company that he's had since 2006. And he does get, so he says he does all these training. So then fast forward, I want to tell you about this other Vimeo video through Bethel Mission. So he's connected to the Bethel Mission Church. A lot of locals are like, the Bethelites are a little wacky. They seem to be from Reading, the area of Reading. And he works with the church. They're missionaries. So he travels often. He said he was in Alabama. And then he was saying his goal was to train missionaries to, when you're in a country and you get kidnapped, he's training them to, get out of the situation. But there's just no real evidence of missionaries saying they've been trained with him. There's really hard to find anyone that's like, oh yeah, he helped save me. He claims he had like 3,000 hours of, abduction and training. And it's just,
because he worked for he was in the military, wasn't he?
Yeah. So yeah, I'll tell you about that. So his experience. So after 9/11.
But just really quickly, I want to just on that thought, on that point. So he obviously, because the missionary angle is very true, right? So we've heard of these horrific stories of people trying to go and spread, whether it's, Christianity to these, countries that maybe, either don't want it introduced there. There's some people who do, but there'll be a hostile sort of audience. And we've heard horrific things happening to missionaries, right? So we know that that's a real thing. But there was some sort of question I thought I saw about it being a nonprofit and him getting in trouble.
Well, so yeah, there's really no evidence that it was a 501c, and they just can't find anything on there that really happened. It takes a long time to register, and there's just between the Daily Beast, there's also this lovely lady, Erica Courtney, which I'll include her blog, but she does a lot of deep diving on this.
Oh,
She's great.
Erica Courtney. Awesome.
Thank you, Erica. We're going to,
thank you, Erica. Yeah, we will definitely give you a shout, and we will link you below in the comments. For sure.
It's called like A Box of Chocolates blog.
How cool.
Because you never know what you'll get. New Blind Unit's Best, adult-based and unapologetic. But she really deep dives on all this stuff. Also, but so the Daily Beast are like, there's really no evidence that they are a nonprofit, but he's linked to this missionary church, Bethel Mission, which is controversial because rumor has it that he's actually getting income from the church. And then when you talk to locals in Reading, a lot of them are saying the Bethelites, the leaders are fraudulent. They collect money. Just to give you a background, like there was a car fire in 2018. So they collect money through their global fund, the Bethel Church Global Fund. And they were saying some people didn't get the money. There's just been a lot of talk about this church not being.
Any charges, or is this all allegations?
It's kind of all allegations. People are like, really, the FBI needs to investigate this church. So far, it hasn't gone that route. The FBI were mentioned to other people that are from the area. That is something that needs to be looked into. So he's linked to this church, and he has this company, Project Taken, and he actually claims for bankruptcy. This is, again, thanks to Erica, she finds it. But they claim bankruptcy, it looks like 2012. However, you'll see this video on Vimeo in 2014. So there's just a lot of sketchy behavior, I would say. Yeah.
Because he goes on TV and then does this very strange sort of demand for Sherri's return.
I don't know your motive. I don't know who you are, where you're going, where you're from. I don't care. I simply care about getting Sherri back.
And that will give you money, no questions asked, right? And leave her, on this particular date at this particular time. And how much money was it?
Well, it was 50. It was 100, like you said. The guy, they were asking for 100, and then somehow they lowered it to 50 is what I recall.
So isn't that interesting? There's all this kind of strange money stuff too, like where money goes and what happened to it. And
there's all these questions. Everyone's like, where did that 50,000 go? Because she was found. Are people getting that returned? And
so what was the question too about so basically he makes this, when does he actually demand her return? What was when did he do it, and how long did they have? I forget. Was it 48?
So, for sure he appears on the scene November 18. That's what he appeared, and she's rescued about 4 days later, right?
Right. So within that time.
Yeah, within that 4 days. Meanwhile, he'd been traveling. He'd been away. and then he pops in on November 18th. It's very strange. And, he was in the military for about 3 years, but he was discharged. He was a senior airman. He went through the normal training that every airman does, but he's trying to say he's done all this other, it's called survival, evasion, resistance, escape training.
Interesting.
SERE training, but it's not confirmed that he actually completed that. But the training videos you'll see, and even what happens to Sherri, she gets beat up, she gets tortured.
Yeah.
That's kind of a part of the SERE training. So
this is what we're going to be talking about next. So the private donor, just as a PS to this, did he, I know he did an interview.
Yeah.
But he was in the shadows.
Did you know Sherri?
Never heard of her before.
Did you know Keith?
Never heard of him either.
So you just walked into this?
Yeah.
Why?
It seemed to me that, here's a girl that, has got 2 little kids and got a husband at home crying, and I just visualized what that life was like and felt like, let's see if we can be creative here.
He's really adamant that it was sex trafficking, this whole sex trafficking angle that comes up. And he goes, I just want to, of course she looks so young. And I'm like, I'm sorry, she doesn't look like she's 18. Like, everyone's debunking that theory.
Right. But the other thing is that there's definitely activity in that I-5 corridor, and that there is a lot of trafficking that goes on of men, women, boys, children, which is so terrifying. It's so awful.
Totally. And I mean, it's true though. It's unfortunate, like you said, like massage parlors. I mean, it's a transient area. They say people get dropped there and then they get, taken. I believe it's very tragic, but they use that angle.
So I would love for you to hang out with me while we sort of go through the rest of this story and see, I'll kind of have you chime in a few places here. So right now where we're at is she's missing. And now these men have come forward. You can watch the ransom video. You can find that online there. It's all kind of readily available. So, at this point, the local paper, the Sacramento Bee, which covered this story from beginning to end, and you can get a lot of information from them. They covered quite a bit, but the big interview would come on December 2nd when Keith sat down with Matt Gutman on ABC's 2020 for a 2-part interview. And we've cited that interview quite a bit. It's tough to get a good version of that online because ABC is super, they're very tight with the way that they air their shows. You have to pay to have a subscription, et cetera, et cetera. You can find it. It's kind of a bootleg version online, but you can find, clips and you can find the full interview. By the time he had done that interview though, on December 2nd, there had been a major break in the case. Police logs that were seen by dailymail.com show multiple sightings were reported in the days after she vanished, including at an eyebrow store in the Mount Shasta Mall, at a Hilltop Medical Center in Redding. And then on November 22nd, just 20 days after Sherri went missing, a 54-year-old marketing director named Christine Everson claimed she saw a woman at a travel center truck stop just outside Redding, just on the outskirts, who closely resembled Sherri Papini. And the way that she tells the story is, it was approximately 7 p.m. Christine was with her husband and her son filling up their car with gas for an out-of-town trip. This is all according to Daily Mail. Christine noticed that the woman looked frightened. She noticed the woman in the car. She noticed that she looked frightened and was with 2 men who kept going back and forth into the travel center. Christine said that it was dark, and I looked over and thought, why are those men going back and forth from a truck in and out when the woman isn't? She said, that women always love to take a potty break and look at what's in the store, and she just thought it was odd. She said that they were there for 20 minutes pumping fuel, et cetera. And my husband was like, what are you doing? And I just saw this blonde lady in a blue pickup truck about 10 yards away. And I did a double take. I thought it was Sherri Papini. So I went over there and I asked her to roll down her window, which kind of blows my mind. Like, that this woman just approached the truck. Like, you got to be solid to do something like that. Like, I don't know. I might call the cops. I might go inside and say something to the clerk, but I don't know if I'd walk up to the car like that. That was definitely like gutsy. And her husband was there. And honestly, give women, like, I love that. Like, I love that she was like, her instinct was to not think about herself, but to think about how she could help this woman. And, maybe we can all take a page from her playbook. I mean, we certainly shouldn't put ourselves in danger, but I thought that was really kind of brave. So she said that, she wasn't positive because she'd never seen Sherri Papini in person, right? And she said when she approached the vehicle, she said, "You look like that woman who was abducted. Are you okay?" She said that the woman never answered her. She asked her if she was being held against her will. "Do you need me to call 911?" Again, the woman didn't answer. She said that this woman looked tired and worn out and scared. She said that she was part of a local anti-trafficking coalition. So she was like acutely aware of, I guess, the signs of this sort of thing. And she was just convinced that this is what was happening. She said that, she could meet her at a safe house. And all the woman said was thanks. She knew something wasn't right. She called the police. She gave the description, the plate number, all the details that were needed. And she wouldn't make any eye contact. Like she gave all of the description, but I guess they did do a little bit of research. I don't know how much they could have done, but when he was asked about this specific sighting, because a lot of news outlets were talking about it, Sheriff Tom Bosenko said the matter had been looked into, and it was determined that the woman in the car was not believed to be Sherri Papini. So interesting kind of thing. I mean, obviously they have their reasons for believing that, but so we get to Thanksgiving. It was early Thanksgiving morning when Allison Sutton says she saw a woman in trouble on the side of northbound I-5 in Yolo County. And she says, quote, "I have like a vague memory of a flash of her face with a definitely scared look on it," said Sutton. Seeing a panicked face, blonde hair, and an arm waving in the air was enough to startle Sutton, she told KTXL. "I could have hit her. She just was really close to the side of the road, frantically waving what looked like a t-shirt up and down, trying to get someone's attention," Sutton said. She pulled over, called 911, but had no idea the woman that she saw was Sherri Papini, the young mother who vanished during that jog. And she knew about it, but she didn't know it was her. She said she felt like she should have done more.
These pieces, I think she is heavily battered and is confirmed kidnapping.
So Keith was at home that morning. He was shaving. His phone rang, his cell phone. According to him, it rang more than once. He didn't answer it. He let it go to voicemail, which I think probably during that time was unusual, you would think. But then when the house phone rang, he picked it up. And he knows that it's blurry because I think there's a lot of adrenaline in that moment. But he said he heard the police and then he heard his wife in the background screaming, and he knew that it was her, that she was safe. He goes on to write about the pain that he felt upon seeing his wife for the first time. And here's some quotes from that. He said, "My first sight of my wife was in a hospital bed, her face covered in bruises, ranging from yellow to black because of repeated beatings, the bridge of her nose broken." This statement was released to Good Morning America, describing the condition she was in when she was freed. He said she was thrown from a vehicle with a bag over her head and a chain wrapped around her waist that was attached to her wrists. Right. He also said that she was badly beaten, and that her hair was chopped off and her nose was broken. So he basically was giving details to a lot of different people. But the problem is, by giving that statement to the media before going to law enforcement, he may have compromised parts of the investigation. Sheriff Bosenko said during a news conference, "I did not know he was going to release this until a short time before I did a media interview. With some of the details he provided, it could affect the integrity of the investigation." He wrote that, and it's out there. He did not talk with us about it. We were a bit surprised by it, Bosenko said. He wanted at the time to keep the Papini's ordeal private, and that the investigators were working, quote, aggressively to find the kidnappers. And they hoped that talking to Sherri, that she might remember more specifics about the abduction. They weren't sure if she was targeted specifically or if it was a random abduction. It turns out that after interviewing Sherri, the sheriff said that they were looking for two armed women driving a dark-colored SUV. He described the alleged captors, two Hispanic women, one younger with dark curly hair, pierced ears and thin eyebrows, and one older with thick eyebrows and straight black and gray hair. Papini told a forensic interviewer that when she was allowed to leave the room where she was being held for a shower, she slammed her younger captor's head into a toilet. Detective Jackson told Papini that she got cut on the side of her right foot in the fight. But apparently Jackson said that when she was being processed at the hospital, no evidence of a cut was seen in the photographs. So that was strange. She also told that she didn't look at the women. She avoided looking in their face so that they wouldn't beat her. She also told investigators that right before she was released, the two captors were arguing. Then she heard a gunshot. The younger of the women escorted her out of her room, put her in a vehicle, and drove along a winding road, eventually just dropping her on the side of the road. They basically went on to sort of detail more of her physical condition. They did find some woman's DNA and male's DNA. He added that the male's DNA was not Keith's. So then they released the sketches. It didn't ring any bells for investigators. Once the sketches were finalized, detectives and investigators reviewed the sketches and compared the sketches with known witnesses or contacts, and nobody, it didn't ring a bell with anybody. They did discuss that she was found branded on the back of her right shoulder. It was still unclear, and it remains unclear to this day because of obscure letters, they say. They don't know. The quality of the brand is poor, Detective Jackson said. They never really did reveal. We still don't know. He said that she was wrapped in zip ties, sort of a compliance restraint, sort of a pain-induced compliance restraint is kind of how they described it. They finally released surveillance footage from a church. It showed Papini running onto an on-ramp of the Interstate 5 after being dropped off. And the video wasn't immediately available, but of course they made it available later. She was able to walk to a nearby church, they said, but nobody was there at 4:30 a.m., obviously. And then she walked back and was able to flag down the woman that we discussed earlier. So, I remember seeing that video and I remember thinking that it just looked crazy. Like it just looked so crazy. Just this shadowy sort of figure. It's black and white. So she's all lit up in white and it's black, pitch black all around her. And she's just like, she looks completely disoriented, but it almost looks like, remember Blair Witch? It almost looks like Blair Witch. For me, it almost looked like Blair Witch. I was just like, just looks like this crazy staged that looks real. And I thought that then. I thought that even before any of the information started to come out about her. Keith goes on to, he has so much gratitude to everybody. He puts out statements saying that their well wishes are so, appreciated. And, the police start to say that, there's no, even over 600 tips, there's just literally no leads. There's nothing that even matches this case, even though there were some abductions. They don't in any way kind of, match anything else that's happened in the area. And at that point, Keith takes Sherri and the children and they go to an undisclosed location away from press and prying eyes. And there are no photographs of her. There's no, there was a report that they chopped her hair off. Apparently they cut it off to her shoulders. There were no photos that were ever released of the bruises, of the brand, of anything, which I do think could technically, because it's still an open investigation, it may not be public record, but I find it interesting that there's literally nothing. But the one thing that's interesting, Annie, is there was a lot of speculation about the composite and the description of the two females. And some pretty disturbing information about Sherri's past was brought to light. And because of this information, an allegation sort of emerges about a possible motivation that she may have had to stir up racial tensions within the community, and that perhaps her choice of naming two women of Hispanic origin as her captors was a deliberate targeting of Latinos and perhaps meant to incite some sort of violent response from the white community. And Krystal, who's not feeling well and unfortunately couldn't join us this time, she has laryngitis, poor baby, but she'll be back with us again. But she was going to take this part over, but it was a racially sort of charged blog post in 2003 under the name Sherri Graff, which is her maiden name, her parents' name. It was circulated in forums as evidence of her troubled history with Latinos. And the blog detailed an incident where Sherri's father had been called Hitler and Nazi by a group of Latino guys and gals. And I'm going to read like a little piece of this. I kind of have a few things here that I thought were sort of interesting. She says, I grew up in a small country town, Shasta Lake, California. My school was predominantly white. It was a small enough town that everybody pretty much knew each other. I was known as a really good athlete. My dad had a reputation for being my biggest fan, for standing up against Latinos. He even was kicked out of the stands for getting in fights and defending himself when the Latinos would call him a Nazi. It seems that our being of German descent was a constant irritant to them. I would get in fights too, having to stick up for myself instead of knuckling under to what the Latinos girls said and wanted. She also says here that one night she's at a homecoming game and they were saluting to her, and you can find, this online, but I won't read the whole thing, but it just basically said that she started a fist fight with these Latino girls. Said he lunged at her, slamming her head between the bleachers and pounding her face. And this is the second time she talks about slamming somebody's head, which I think is also kind of interesting. She slammed her captor's head, and she slammed, because now she's trying to sort of disavow that this is even her, but she uses very similar language in this that she did with her report when she was found. So I found that to be very interesting. The girl, apparently the Latino girl, did not press charges, but the second part of this post, she says this, which brings me to the point of why girls should not fight. We are just too fragile.
I was just going to say that. I'm like,
I know.
Why are you starting a fight? Like, literally, I've never started a fight. Why would you do that?
I know. And it's like, but it's just so funny. It's like, we're fragile and we break easily. And I totally agree with skinheads that girls should not fight. They should stand by their men, right? And then she says this thing. She said her dad was super proud of her. She talks about a time where they showed up at the pizzeria that her parents owned, the same girls, and they beat her up, and they fractured her leg, and like all these crazy, like I think undocumented really injuries to her. But so then the last thing that I just want to read, she says, being white is being more than just being aware of my skin, but of standing behind skinheads who are always around in spirit as well, having pride for my country. Being white is my family, my roots, my way of life. It's always there. There's no denying it. It's nobility. It's strength. It will be there to lift me up when I really need my pride, when I need to keep walking. So, what's interesting? She went on to say later that, her father said it was nonsense, that she did not write that it was some jerk who posted it and it isn't true. Her husband said that it was vile and awful and that it wasn't her. But you know what? There's some similar language to the language that she used when she described what she did while she was in captivity, slamming the head, all that stuff. Two Hispanic women. It was two Hispanic women that beat her up. It was two Hispanic women that kidnapped her. But also what I thought was sort of interesting is if somebody was going to write a really vile post, right, and attribute your name to it, would it be so narrative like that and talking about your relationship with your dad and like the pizzeria that you own and like how proud he was of you and the fact that you were a good athlete and a good student? Or would it just be like vile, like laden with like, slurs and if somebody's going to try to like get you and somebody's going to try to like post something in your name to hurt you, like wouldn't they go a little further than just being like, I'm proud of being what? Because it's wrong no matter what, right? So we all can agree that the post is like very, it's very strange.
Yeah.
But don't you think if somebody was trying to target you by posting in your name that they would have gone further? Doesn't it sound a little mild?
It does sound mild. It sounds like a story, like you said.
Like that she would actually write. Like she's not ashamed of the way that she feels. Those are her views. And she's talking very candidly about her family and about where she comes from and the kind of student she was. And it's too detailed to be something that like somebody's just trying to post in her name. That's what I don't understand. I just feel like if somebody was trying to like frame her, they would have said some pretty crazy outlandish stuff.
Yeah.
Right. It's weird. And I just think that it's too strange that there's so much of a line being drawn of so much in common with what is being attributed to her as a blog post and what has happened in the way that she described her captivity. I just think they're so similar, you know? And I don't know what that means necessarily. And obviously the police and the FBI aren't very interested either in finishing up or wrapping up this case. I mean, to kind of like PS all of it, and then we can get into sort of our theories about it all. But Keith ended up writing sort of a letter, a public letter, and I won't read the whole thing, but he just says he wants to, address the overwhelming amount of gratitude that he feels, and that he wants to thank everybody who, for the extremely generous donations that he received. And then he sort of gets into, we live in a nation of free speech accompanied with an era of technology that provides immediate gratification. He says, I am grateful for this system, as it is what spread my wife's face quickly throughout the world. The unfortunate side is that some people have been sitting in angering, expectant positions, waiting for the gory details. Lies and hate have been both exhausting and disgusting. Those people should be ashamed of their malicious, subhuman behavior. Yeah. And then, which is also an interesting word, right?
Yeah. And they say that's like something white supremacists use.
Oh, yeah. Subhuman is definitely a dog whistle.
Used that word. I'm like, what? And then
subhuman is a dog whistle for sure. And then it's like, ultimately it was Sherri's will to survive that brought her home. That was the last line. Thank you. There's a lot in between there too. That's just, but that's essentially what it says. That's sort of the cliff notes. But at this point, Annie, it's been 4 years since the disappearance of Sherri Papini, and the police are no closer to finding the truth. She lives in the same house. She's married to the same man. Her children are obviously, growing, and she's just living a quiet life, and I'm sure not without some sort of consequences because of this ordeal. I do think it's interesting that they bought the house that they were living in.
So that's interesting. We talked about last episode, but like they bought the house from his father for like $128,000. Like they bought it from him. It's very interesting.
Because they were renting it to that point.
They were renting it, and then they bought it around, what did they say, 2017, 18? I can't remember at the moment, but we have it. It's in the Daily Mail article.
And like what I was saying, I said in the first part of this podcast before you joined, is that the police offered $10,000 immediately for her safe return, right? Or for any kind of information that would lead to her safe return. Then there was a GoFundMe for $50,000, and the private donor offered $100,000. Mm-hmm. And it just felt to me that immediately they started asking for money. Immediately there was a cash grab. Right away for them, it was like, we need money, we need a lot of money, we need money. And it's like, why do you need so much money? Posters are not that expensive. Yeah. People are volunteering their time to go and find her. And the police just started the investigation. Yeah. And I found out that there was a private investigator that worked pro bono. So they weren't even paying.
That's interesting. Yeah,
So for me, it's like, why do people right away need money? Yeah, I don't get it. Keith, maybe because Keith needs a leave of absence from work. Like, okay, I understand. Right. But again, it was 2 or 3 days in and they started asking for $50,000.
Yeah, I agree.
She could have come back at any, like they didn't know anything at that point.
No. And they really had to let law enforcement kind of do their thing, investigate. Yeah. And he really made those boo-boos when he started talking about the details, Keith.
Yeah, big time. But I also think that sometimes that can be a sign of nervousness, right? A sign to sort of.
I think he's nervous. He's
a period at the end of the sentence. Let's just like, this is what it was. Let's move on.
He's freaking out. I mean, he like adores her. I mean, I think I have a theory, but
I want to know it. This is where we're at. So we're going to do the final thoughts on this case before we close it out.
And just so you know, the Gambles, like they're not in Reading anymore. They apparently skipped town, went to North Carolina. Like they're not associated with that church anymore. They're not. I don't even know. They're kind of an MIA.
Because I also saw that he was involved in some other kind of abduction cases, like that people were still sort of calling him for things, but they're no longer in Reading. That's interesting.
No, it sounds like they moved to North Carolina, but they don't know if they still live there. It's very, very interesting. But my thing with Keith, like when he went to the media, my gut says that he was like, I'm going to call you out. You're calling Wolf. She's clearly, I really think she staged it. I just don't think she was kidnapped. What's really sad is there's another woman who's still missing, Stacey Smart. And they were really upset that like this case kind of took over in the headlines and she's still missing. Just a side note, but something for us to all be aware, to
say her name again.
Stacey Smart.
Okay.
And
Stacey Smart is still missing, everybody.
Yeah. So like something to think about, she went missing like right before Sherri did. I just don't buy that she was abducted. I just don't. And I feel Keith went to the media. I feel he was like, you want to play this game? This is where his controlling comes in. I'm going to go to the media and I'm going to talk to everyone.
Look, there were, was she a webcam girl? Was she dating men online? Was she going to meet that guy from Michigan who obviously had nothing to do with her disappearance? But, was she meeting somebody? And we even talked in first episode about, could she have possibly put herself in a situation that ended up being dangerous, that she didn't expect to be dangerous?
Yes, it could be that. Mm-hmm.
Was there a racially motivated, racial motivation for any of this? We don't know that either. We don't know any of it. What I find sort of crazy is that her family has completely gone silent.
Yes.
The police and the FBI have not continued to pursue the case. And everything is just back to normal and back to life. And meantime, the community of Reading is not worried that there are 2 armed Hispanic women driving around with a handgun trying to pick up blonde joggers. Like, is it because they know? I just think maybe the community isn't concerned because they know the truth, and I think that my theory really, honestly, is kind of the same as yours. I don't know what happened to her. I've never seen any of her injuries. I've never seen any evidence of her brand. I've never seen anything. But I do believe the detectives when they say she was beaten. So there's no reason to, right? There's no reason to not believe them. There's no reason to not believe Detective Jackson when he says she was battered and her hair was cut, right? So I do think obviously something happened, but I think that the story we'll never know. I don't think we'll ever know what happened. But I think based on her past and based on, the things that have come to light about her, if you were to really try to get me to guess, I think she put herself in a situation that unfortunately she thought maybe was going to be an adventure and ended up being a misadventure, right?
It could have been truly that she was getting together with somebody and they turned out to be a bit, evil, and and she's embarrassed about it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Or that she just she was hurt. Or listen, maybe she still had some sort of beef with the Latino community and there were people who were coming after her. We don't know that either. That could be. And I wouldn't even, there's gangs in California.
Sure.
There's gangs everywhere. And that's not to blame either side. That's just to say that, is it possible that if she is somebody who is a known enemy of a Latin gang or that they wouldn't try to make an example out of her? And if there weren't ongoing fights and if there wasn't, who knows? I mean, that's entirely possible too, that she was taken for whatever reason because of her views or the people that she spent time with or, and we'll just never know. And that is kind of the end of this case. But thank you so much for doing this with me, Annie.
Absolutely.
I appreciate it. And we're going to do it again. Thank you, everybody, for listening to What Crime Is It? Please subscribe, leave your comments below. We also have the audio version of the podcast available wherever you can get podcasts. Annie, I will see you very soon.